tomorrow, the first regional rankings will come out. Our friend Inkblot on the message board has predicted what he believes they will be. He's not entirely as confident as he has been in the past, but we will see. But before we do that, Matt thought it would be a good idea, and I agree with Matt, if we kind of went over everything involved. So get your notebooks out, start taking some notes, and you'll understand the process a little bit better. All right, so the first thing I'm going to bring up is the criteria. If you see those, there is a required selection criteria and then a set of secondary criteria. And Matt, would you go through those and explain if the text is big enough for you to read anyway?
Yeah, it's just right. Yeah, perfect for me, actually. I appreciate that, Brandon.
Good.
The top two, there's, of course, the in-region winning percentage. And the NCAA is going to take the country and divide it into 4 super regions. And with that in mind, they're going to try and choose 7 squads from each super region to make up a total of 28 teams making the playoffs. So with that in mind, the in-region winning percentage is something that the NCAA wants to have a good idea of how teams are doing in their region. Then you also have Division II winning percentage as a whole, fairly self-explanatory. Then the Division II strength of schedule, which is primarily going to be the winning percentage of the teams that you've been playing. But there's also a third of that component, which is how are those teams, opposition's winning percentages as well. So that's the third component, and a very big one. And then you also had Division II head-to-head competition, if there has been, along with, the results from common opponents, which is, once again, if there has been. With a fair amount of these conferences playing kind of their own little silo conference schedules, some of those, that 4th and 5th point may not happen with other teams that they're tied with in different conferences. But then there's the secondary criteria, which is basically over and above that. If all things look about the same with regard to a team's resume, then you're looking at things like D2 results versus teams with a winning record. Performance indicator, which is a new measure this year, that's basically gives you a certain amount of points for the more quality of wins that you have and the opponents you played. And then also there's the results versus ranked D2 opponents. And those are, once again, additional criteria. The top ones, the 5 that you have listed there, are truly the ones that they're basing their decisions off of. And then the additional 3 at the bottom are kind of as needed.
All right. So
I think it's really important to just reference a couple things. And thanks for that, Whit. That was great. But I think it's important to talk about a couple of things that are not part of that criteria.
Yes.
Such as conference championships don't matter. If you win your conference championship, that's always job number 1 for most teams, but it actually is not part of the selection criteria. So that doesn't really matter. And when we talk about strength of schedule, weighted OWP, what's really important there is Division II competition. So as much as we love things like West Florida beating McNeese State, we actually talked about this earlier in the year on this show, it doesn't really help them in the regional rankings. And when you see records referenced in regional rankings, typically it's referencing your Division II record. And teams must play a minimum of 8 Division II teams just to be eligible. You have to play 10 opponents overall, and you have to play 8 Division II opponents. So yeah, as somebody just commented, polls don't matter. So our poll, as much as we put into it, as much as we like it, our poll doesn't factor into it at all. The AFCA poll doesn't factor into it at all.
Correct. They matter, but they're not included in the criteria.
Ours matters a lot, but it's not part of
to us.
Exactly. So with that in mind,
and I believe the performance indicator, that's something from kind of basketball, used a lot in the basketball criteria, and they've started to use that in football now.
Yeah, other sports as well. Yeah, soccer, volleyball.
Okay. Yeah. My initial thoughts on it were that I like it a lot because it really breaks things down. And were there 39 different levels of points, or was it 32?
I think it was like 39. I've seen, the scale that they have, and we can maybe, do a quick shot of that next week after we've got this thing rolling. But essentially what it is in volleyball, they have one, kind of scale where there's like 20 measures. Let's say soccer's got like 14. So for whatever reason, there are differing scales with this. But it basically is rewarding you for your better wins and things of that sort. And I think it's just one more thing to be able to have in the toolbox if you're the NCAA to try and differentiate between one team and the next if all things look equal.
All right. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's look at the top 10 in each region before we see how Inkblot projects that they will play out. So,
and these are in order 1 to 10, top to bottom, correct, Brandon?
Yes, that is correct. So in Super Region 1, it's Kutztown, Shepherd, Bentley, Notre Dame. California, IUP, New Haven, Slippery Rock, Stonehill, and Shippensburg. Super Region 2, Valdosta State, Bowie State, Albany State, West Georgia, West Florida, Wingate, Mars Hill, Newberry, West Alabama, and Fayetteville State. Super Region 3 is Ferris State, Harding, Lindenwood, Grand Valley, Northwest Missouri, Nebraska Kearney, Henderson State, Ouachita Baptist is what that should say, Washburn, and Pittsburgh State. And then Augustana, Colorado Mines, Central Washington, Midwestern State, Angelo State, Bemidji State, Wayne State, Duluth, Minnesota Duluth, Colorado Mesa, and Western Colorado. So that is what he has as the top 10 in each super region. Now, that is not necessarily how they will end up. So, Whit, do you think we should go ahead and look at the projections then that he had?
Well, let's come back to that for 1 second if you can, Brandon.
Okay. Do you want me to pull that back up?
Yeah, if you could. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Keep in mind, folks, what we're looking at the moment is we're looking at 10 teams listed. The top 7 are going to be the ones who make the playoffs in any one of these super regions. And we're going to mention this weekly, but this is a snapshot in time. So, in other words, a week from now, your team could end up getting passed up by another team who just had a really quality win. So, in other words, this isn't like a poll where you just assume that no one jumps you as long as you're winning.
I think the big thing to emphasize there is that the weighted opponent winning percentage will change from week to week, and I do not believe that it forecasts your future opponents. So when the rankings come out tomorrow, it's not yet looking at California and Slippery Rock playing in 2 weeks. It's not looking at New Haven and Bentley playing in 2 weeks. It's only up to that point in time. So it's not yet factoring in games that haven't been played. So that strength of schedule, which is calculated based on opponent winning percentage, it's going to change a lot, and it can cause movement in these rankings quite a bit.
Well, I think a good look at that, Chuck, is Lindenwood right now at 3 in Super Region 3. They play William Jewell, who's winless this year, coming up.
Right.
So immediately their strength of schedule is going to take a hit. I mean, they may even fall out of that 3 spot that we're projecting them to be in, even with a win, just because of the fact that their strength of schedule is going to go down.
Right. I know.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in that Super Region 3, you have Northwest playing Kearney this week, and you have Henderson playing Ouachita later in the year. So there's 2 huge games there just coming up. Next couple weeks, we can really change strength of schedule in just Super Region 3.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And I think, Inkblot said in his comments on the message board, he doesn't feel quite so confident yet. And I don't either. And the reason is we don't quite know how this committee is going to look at things like your overall D2 winning percentage versus strength of schedule. Which one might they value more right now? So somebody asked about California at number 5. Based on the strength of schedule, number 5 might be where they fall. Now, the committee also might look at it and say, Bentley and Cal are 7-0, perfect winning percentage in D2. They're 1-2. That could happen. I don't think that's likely to happen, but until we kind of see the first release of these rankings and sort of see what the committee is thinking, we don't quite know. I mean, it's guesswork every week that we do this, but it's really guesswork until we kind of see where that's going to go.
Yeah, I would say that same logic applies in Super Region 2. I mean, you got several 2-loss teams ahead of Fayetteville State that has 1 loss. And I think when you're looking at things like strength of schedule, that's certainly going to kick in to, even though they got 1 loss. So it'll be really interesting to see how all that puts together. Super Region 2 also, you got a number of Gulf South teams in there that have yet to play each other. You know, West Georgia, Valdosta have to play this week, West Florida, West Alabama next week, and then the final week of the regular season, you got Delta and West Georgia and Valdosta and West Florida. So there's certainly a lot of movement that could certainly happen in all of here. And I was having a conversation earlier. What happens if, you know, Inkblot has Bowie State number 2 and Valdosta happens to lose? I mean, do you move Valdosta out of the 1 spot? Or do you keep them there? I mean, with the Bowie State looming right behind them, that's undefeated in Division II play, and if they win their entire schedule and get a boost from Fayetteville State, that'll be a 1 loss at that point.
Well, so, let me interrupt, Kris, because I think the question is maybe a flaw in the way we all think about this. Okay, because you're talking about moving them up, moving them down, but in reality, every week starts with nobody.
Right.
With no ranking.
Right.
So it could be possible that even if Valdosta were to lose, Bowie continues to win, that Valdosta would stay in the number 1 spot. It's also theoretically possible that Valdosta could, and that probably is theoretically possible, but not realistic, that Valdosta continued to win. Bowie continues to work on their strength of schedule and theoretically surpasses Valdosta. That could theoretically happen as well. It won't likely, but you know, that could theoretically happen too. But I think, you know, the problem is not the problem, but the difficulty we as humans is we remember what happened last week and where they were ranked last week. And it doesn't really apply to this week because it is a new set of criteria, a new set of everything over and over each week.
Yeah. How's your resume look now? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think Inkblot, you put a comment up there with him saying Lindenwood, even with 1 loss, they could get surpassed by the GAC and the MIAA teams even if they keep winning, just because they're through the schedule and kind of the perception there could definitely do that. So there's one thing they keep it's always a snapshot of your current resume and not a predictor what's going forward with it. So especially these first couple of weeks, just kind of get everybody to gauge where they're at in the region, not a prediction of where they're going to be.
Right. And I think we've seen examples of what the comment you just put up about, you know, theoretically if Valdosta loses that they could still stay number 1. We've seen that happen many times over the years in these rankings. And I think you made an excellent point there, Brandon. We've probably all had enough interaction with committee members to know that typically the process is every time they do this, they're starting with a whole new top 10 every week that they do it. They're not just looking at, well, here's the top 10 that we had last week. This team lost. Where do we move them? They're just going in with the intent of creating a new top 10 every week that they do this.
Absolutely.
Brandon, can you put up the graphic one last time, if you would?
Which one, Matt? The criteria or the top 10?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the top 10 in each. Because I think maybe the most interesting team on the board is the 3rd slot in Super Region 4, Central Washington. And the reason I say that is because they're playing just a real weird schedule because of the fact that, you know, the GNAC of old is basically you're playing Western Oregon twice. You're playing Simon Fraser twice. Those schools have 3 wins between them. Then you have, you know, they played at Eastern New Mexico, who's got 3 wins, but at the same time, they have beaten Midwest State in Texas, and they're a team that's 5-2 and 5-1 and actually in D2 competition. They lost to Angelo State, so they've got only 1 loss. Central Washington does, but it's really hard to assess how good they are because they're playing a pretty weak schedule otherwise, but they have a signature win over a team that's probably going to be in the playoffs. So it's really hard. I understand, like, when Inkblot's looking at this saying they're probably the swing team because, I mean, the committee might look at them and say, hey, you look great, or they may say you look like you're in the 5 spot. So I think that's the hardest one to figure in this whole group.
I took his comments out of order. He says that's the one that he's most looking forward to seeing where they end up.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and let's see how he has them ranked and how, if the playoffs were to start next week, things would theoretically go. As we see, we know 1 through 7 in each category, and we haven't even addressed earned access. But let's go ahead and look at Super Region 1. It would involve Kutztown getting the bye, Shepherd hosting New Haven, Bentley hosting IUP, and Wingate, which is a Super Region 2 team, sliding up to Super Region 1 and playing Notre Dame.
Now, Brandon, why would they be moving? Can we explain that to the viewer?
Well, unfortunately, Inkblot would be the best one to explain it. But ultimately, it comes down to this: savings of travel. And it could even be a second round savings. So it might not save, for instance, it might save one flight in the first round, or they might have a team go on a flight in the first round because they know in the second round it would save 2 flights. And I was told, and I don't know what the numbers are, that a lot of these charter flights end up costing over $100,000 each. Well, this is the Deuce. This is not, this is not the FBS. This is not Power 5. So those costs are closely monitored, and that's a big factor in this in these teams changing potential regions. If you finish essentially 5, 6, or 7 in a region, you could theoretically be shipped out to another region if it does save on travel. So
if you're a non-host team, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, that's exactly what I was going to say. If you're hosting, you're good. If you're not hosting, you could wind up in a separate, in another super region. So theoretically, Wingate could win Super Region 1 and play Mars Hill, who's in Super Region 2, we'll get to that, in the championship game under this setup. So it no longer prevents 2 teams from the same conference playing in the championship. Having said that, let's move to Super Region 2. Valdosta State gets the bye right now. Bowie will host Mars Hill. Albany State will host West Florida. And West Georgia will host Henderson State, who moves from Super Region 4 to Super Region 2. So again, there must be some savings there.
Brandon, let me stop you for one moment.
Yeah.
Just viewing West Florida at Albany State, for those who've been in tune with Albany State, they're the team who probably limited Valdosta the most offensively, who looks like a complete juggernaut.
Right.
The idea that Albany State would be putting their defense up against West Florida, who's a very strong offensive team, that'd be a fascinating matchup if this were to somehow hold.
It would be. What was it? 20-3? Was that the score of that game? If I remember right,
21-3. Yeah,
21-3. Okay, I knew it was very close. So
Albany State has three shutouts, and I think 2 or 3 other games where they allowed 6 or less. So they're a legit defense.
Hey, Brandon, I didn't get a chance to mention this.
Yeah,
my computer was acting up a little bit, but when we talk about travel, right? I mean, it's a 600-mile radius. So that's the other thing to keep in mind in all of that. Like West Florida and Pensacola and Albany, Georgia, are only 3 hours or so driving.
Right. Well, ultimately, they don't care about the distance as long as it's under 600. So whether it's an hour or 599, all they care. And there's an in-house system that they use to determine that. And there are public links to it. You can figure out what they consider to be the distance between 2 places. But yes, that would not be a bad one at all. Not a bad drive.
And the other goal is to avoid in-conference matchups in the first round, at least, right?
Correct. Yeah,
or at least rematches. Yeah.
Is that what they said? Rematches?
I think it's rematches. But that's a good point, Kris. That's secondary to the overall objective of reducing flights, but that is part of their published mission as well, is to try to minimize those rematches, or where possible, conference rematches.
Kris, does your map in the background calculate distance at all?
I have a calculator for that.
All right, let's go ahead and bring that back up and look at Super Region 3. Ferris State would be the host team, or the bye, in the first round. Harding would host Northwest Missouri. Lindenwood would host Nebraska Kearney. Grand Valley would host California, Cal U. So they would slide from Super Region 1 to Super Region 3. That would be an interesting
That would be awesome. Wouldn't that be fascinating? So, again, just to apply some historical perspective, in the past, that's a matchup that would not have been able to happen until we got to at least the semifinals, because they're in 2 different regions. So, this has some very specific goals in mind for cost savings, but it could also result in some pretty awesome matchups that we otherwise would not see. That would certainly be fascinating.
Chuck, I don't know if Cal would use the word awesome if they saw that pairing, but I'm with you.
Yeah, when you get into playoffs, man, I mean, there's no hiding from anybody, so you're either in or you're out.
Well, I think
matchups, you have Northwest and Harding that has history in the playoffs, and then Kearney and Lindenwood, the former MIAA team, be 3 really interesting first-round matchups in Super Region 3 if it's like that is the current setup as well.
Devin, we clearly have a different opinion of what's interesting, because I am tired of the Harding Northwest game. Ship one of them to a different region. Let's see something else. I am not about that at all. So let's go ahead and look at.
I enjoy watching Northwest shut down the triple option. So I enjoy watching Northwest just shut down the veer and the triple option a little bit there. So I find that enjoyable. I know other people won't, but I enjoy that, watching Rich Wright work his magic there against triple options.
Well, last time Harding shut down the Northwest too.
That's fair.
They're one play away from this.
I just want to mention how in the past it's been like where some conferences have tried to avoid other conferences, and that isn't happening with this new arrangement now.
Right.
So I think that's the other historical perspective here that who are you
tiptoeing up to on that comment, Kafer?
I'm just saying, PSAC folks, they don't want to play the GLIAC or. I
got Armo on line 2 right now.
The GAC, they don't want to play the Gulf South. That's the way I see it. And unfortunately, this isn't avoid that anymore.
The comment section now just became like a slot machine where ding, 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 ding. Let's go ahead and bring that.
You're welcome.
We're giving Armo your cell phone number right now as we speak.
Okay, looking at Super Region 4, guys. Augustana would be the host team. They would get a bye, Colorado Mines would host Wayne State, Nebraska. Central Washington, as Matt talked about, as an interesting team, would host Bemidji State. Midwestern State would host Angelo State. And that would be Super Region 4. So they don't have anybody. Super Region 4 would stay basically Super Region 4. And Matt, as we were talking earlier in the day, it's likely going to stay that way because of the geography of SR4.
Yeah, well, the first thing I didn't even notice this before, Brandon, that conference matchup with Angelo and Midwestern. So that's, I got to be honest with you, that's not real exciting to me.
Agreed.
But it kind of speaks to those teams having a little bit of separation from the team that's 6th. Is kind of what it speaks to right there. But, that could tighten up certainly in the coming weeks. But, yeah, I mean, the problem with Super Region 4 is it's hard for them to get involved too much with this cross-bracket thing because of the fact that you have, for example, the entire RMAC, who no one else is going to be able to be within driving distance of. Right. So, it kind of limits that conversation, especially Central Washington also. I mean, they're obviously without a doubt in that same boat. So I think there's a greater likelihood that we're going to see teams between Super Region 2 and 3 go ahead and have a little bit of intermingling, and then maybe Super Regions 1 and 3. But I think there's a real chance that you may not see anybody affected with 4 unless you end up seeing like a Wayne State going and traveling to a Northwest Missouri State or something like that, which is still or within the realm.
Or theoretically, maybe one of the Northern Lone Star teams or an Eastern Lone Star team going over to the Gulf South, maybe. Right, that might be, but RMAC and any part of the Northern Sun, not in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, probably is going to avoid a move, or Wayne, Nebraska. You're probably right on that. So
the other issue with Super Region 4 is that Central Washington's actually already played Angelo and Midwestern.
Yep.
So there's not a lot of flexibility either in that region.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the only super. Maybe off the top of my head, it's the only super region I believe that doesn't have an undefeated team. You've got 4 undefeated teams across the country, and 2 of them in Super Region 1, and then you don't have any in Super Region 4. So it's where 2 losses, maybe even 3 losses, you might still be able to find a way to get in.
Right. So,
yep.
All right, guys.
Well, the prospect of not great. The prospect of moving teams around into different regions, I think, is pretty interesting. But do just want to reemphasize that the selection process itself is still regionalized. Yeah. So, we can look at, Wingate maybe playing in the SR1 bracket, or, New Haven playing in the SR2 bracket, something like that. Theoretically, those things can happen. But the selection process itself, when we start just looking at who's in and who's out, that is still completely siloed within its regions.
Right. They're picking the best 7 in each super region. Then after that point, they give a look at how things would break down from a travel standpoint. Exactly, Chuck.
Right.
Well, I am all for mixing the regions up. In fact, if they were to send all, I know it'll never happen, if they were to send all 5, 6, 7s into a different region, I would be all for that, because that would be, in my opinion, a heck of a lot of fun to see new things. Unlike Devin, I don't like to see the same thing over and over and over, and we prefer some new matchups. So. All right.
Well, that Western Colorado Mesa game is going to be huge. Because that's potentially a team. The winner could certainly move up and make a case to break into that Super Region 4 top 7. So that's something else to consider. As we're kind of dissecting that.
Well, it's also important. I'm going to bring up this slide to point out that it'll also be good for both teams in terms of strength of schedule.
Right.
Because you see, they both have great records, but they're below 1, 2, 3, 4. Both teams are below 4 teams with 2 losses. So that's largely the factor in their poor ranking. I guess being in the top 10 isn't a poor ranking, but you understand nonetheless. So is there anything else we need to add about the regional rankings, guys, or did you think we covered it?
Well, they come out tomorrow afternoon about 3-4 p.m. or so, if I recall correctly.
It's always late the first time.
They'll also have a worksheet at the very bottom of the NCAA page that kind of shows their work a little bit in terms of the numbers, the raw numbers that are behind this. And at that point, I think we can further figure out a little bit exactly how they're arriving at things, because we don't have the exact numbers in front of us, literally, with the data. But Inkblot's done a really good job, whether it's in last few years, and to the point where Brandon, you and I have kind of joked around where we've had someone from the NCAA run into us, down in Texas, and even inquire about hey, who's this guy? He's right on top of it. So kudos to you, Inkblot.
Yeah, who's the Stephen Hawking that's figuring this stuff out? I mean, that's exactly what they're asking. So.
They assumed it was me all along, of course. I mean, why wouldn't they?
They did not assume it was Matt. So
hey, before we move off of that, Brandon, just real quick tutorial, just so people have some perspective, because we talked about the committee, because this is selected by committee. So just a real couple quick talking points on who the committee is. So each region has its own 8-person committee, and those 8 people are 2 people from each conference. So there's equal representation for each conference, 2 people from each conference. It could be a sitting head coach, or it could be an administrator. Those people, among all the regional committees, also make up the national committee. There are 2 people from each regional committee that are also designated to the national committee. So 2 people from each conference on your regional committee, and then 2 people from each regional committee on your national committee. The national committee actually facilitates a lot of the administrative work that goes into hosting the championship. And it's really the regional committees that are largely responsible for the rankings and the selection process.